And joining us now on the debate, Diane Pacom, sociologist at the University of Ottawa. Alison Hearn, professor in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at the University of Western Ontario. Jordan Peterson, psychologist at the University of Toronto and Your Agenda Insight contributing essayist. And Andrew Potter, columnist at Maclean's Magazine and the author of The Authenticity Hoax. Okay, I know everybody is very fixated on Anthony Weiner right now, especially given the news that he stepped down today. But this is not new, friends. And Michael, let's put up this list if we can, because people tweeting badly is a phenomenon that actually goes back a bit. February 2009, then U.S. Congressman Pete Hoekstra broke security regulations by tweeting that he had just landed in Baghdad. September 2009, Indian Minister of State for External Affairs Shashi Tharoor lampooned his government's austerity measures by tweeting that he was traveling, quote, in cattle class out of solidarity with all our holy cows. November 2010, Gareth Compton, councillor in Birmingham, UK, asked on Twitter if someone would stone a prominent Muslim newspaper columnist to death. And lest you think this doesn't happen here, May 28, 2011, a picture of genitals appeared briefly on Niagara Falls PC candidate George Lepp's Twitter feed. Lepp says his phone was stolen. Okay, Diane, any reason to believe that people with public personas are more likely than the average person to get into trouble online?
I personally think yes, absolutely.
How come?
It's a societal problem. We give these people so much power that they have an aura of invincibility. This is one of the things. Like, they're not aware that eventually people are going to look at them as other human beings, and this is quite important. But risk-taking in our society is a very, very important phenomenon. We live in a world with bureaucracy and discipline and discretion, and people who succeed, like these politicians or stars or celebrities, they are extremely disciplined people. So there is nothing which is left to other than a very strict control of what they're saying, what they're doing. They have teams working with them.
So this is the way they branch out.
Actually, I believe it's more than that. Is they literally go back to some primitive rituals that we had throughout history, which is to tempt the fate. You know, they tempt the gods.
They tempt the gods. They've been doing a lot of that. Any reason to think that people who are in public life, politicians in particular, are more prone to this than others?
It's a good question. I haven't seen any great psychological studies on this. There was, I was reading Twitter before we came in, and I saw a tweet just sort of saying that it said that politicians are more prone to this kind of stuff. I haven't seen the data on it. You can kind of do some pop psychology on it and think the kind of person who's going to go into politics in the first place is probably a little more narcissistic than the average person, is probably a little more their evaluation of risk is probably a little off-kilter from the rest of the population. Probably not hugely so, but I think probably on the margin, yeah, you might have this. But also, I think there's also a huge selection bias going on here, right? I know lots of people who have engaged in, the accidental DM, right? That's the accidental direct message, which is when you think you're direct messaging someone on Twitter and you actually end up making it public, right?
Sending it out there.
But you don't hear about it because they're not public figures. So there is that selection bias going on.
Jordan, I wonder if part of this, the nickname for politics is show business for ugly people. That's what it's called.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can't help but think that in all of Anthony Weiner's doing what he was doing, there is, not to put it too harshly, but there's a not terribly attractive man who spends a lot of time by himself, away from family, away from normal life, because he lives in this fishbowl, trying to do something that will give him validation. It's part narcissism, it's part loneliness.
Well, the narcissism part is interesting because there are studies on actors. And actors are clearly more narcissistic than non-actors on average, And so, and I think thinking about them in the same light as politicians is reasonable because you have to be willing to put yourself in the public eye. And you also have to be disagreeable enough to think that your opinion matters and to enforce it on other people. And that's part of being narcissistic. Now, not to say that that's always wrong, but then the ugly aspect of that is also interesting because a lot of people, men in particular, are very, very much driven to seek female attention through the acquisition of power. I mean, it's a standard and very, very effective strategy. So that fits the current case, the case of Weiner, very well, and I think it's a perfectly reasonable way to think about it.
Allison, I wonder how much of this as well is everybody just trying to figure out still, I mean, Twitter's not that old after all, it's only a few years old. We're still trying to figure out the etiquette around all of this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can look at the history of media innovations, technological innovations, and see that it takes a while for people to figure out how to use it and what the rules are around it. I mean, when film came in, people would sit in the audiences and yell and scream at the movies. It took a while for there to be social consensus that that's not what you do. And yet, I mean, I think that the bigger issue really is that etiquette, I mean, etiquette is a funny phrase because it really suggests that etiquette is there for people who aren't intimate to figure out how to deal with each other, right? It's about boundaries and respecting boundaries. And we live in an era where nobody can ever figure out who anybody is to anybody anymore anyway.
Well, are you saying that we have yet to agree on a social etiquette that says, don't shoot your junk and email it to somebody else?
Yeah,
We're not there yet.
and I think we're in an era where the technology allows us to be everybody's friend. Right? We're not necessarily employees or, you know, authority figures. Everybody's our friend or our follower or a fan. And, you know, I think that this is a real problem because then there are no rules and nobody really knows what the rules are. So everyone's intimate with everybody else.
Let me read this from the Washington Post. This is very clever. Michael, if you would, let's put this up. But Weiner claimed that his actions were contained entirely within his personal computing devices. In previous millenniums, if a married caveman had carved a picture of his junk onto a bone and thrown it into another woman's cave, that would have been wrong. Private part self-portraiture, gross in every eon. But 20 years ago, Weiner would have had to load his Nikon with film before pointing it at his crotch. He would have had to take the film to Photomat, wait 24 hours before picking it up, find an envelope, lick a stamp. In every preceding era, there were built-in checkpoints, moments in which one could ask oneself, is this a good idea? Am I a congressman? Should that influence my decision? There was, in fact, a literal red flag, the one you flicked up on the mailbox to signal to your postal carrier that your correspondence was ready for the world. Those built-in checkpoints don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So what do we do?
I actually think that's a brilliant column, actually, and it's a point that the American law professor Lawrence Lessig made almost 15 years ago now in a book he wrote about. It was called Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace, and he made what I think the essential point is that a lot of what we take for granted about sort of the norms in society are actually held in check by the architecture of the world, which installs a great deal of friction, or did for a long time, in the transmission of information, which allowed for a great deal of sober second thought, allowed for a lot more elbow room with respect to making mistakes and so on, that the grease lightning of information no longer allows. And so, yeah, and he even recommended back then, we need to install some deliberate breaks, some kind of like slow technology into it. The question is how, where, when, and who gets to make those decisions. And as Allison pointed out, right, we're still kind of sorting all this out. And so the who and the what and the where and the how is gonna be the big challenge.
Indeed. Jordan.
Well, two things. First, there is an app for Gmail that will enable you to put an auto delay on your mail. And I don't remember if they call it the intoxicated or impulsive app. It's something like that. So it delays your mail for 10 minutes. And so you can just do that with all your mail. And it's for exactly this reason. Second, you know, people think that they have inhibitions that they carry around with them. And that's what sort of regulates their behavior. But that's actually not nearly as true as people think. Most of what inhibits us in a social context is other people. Yeah. And so if you're around the other person, you're watching their eyes and their facial gestures and everything to make sure that what you're saying remains acceptable and goal-directed.
But what if you're alone?
Well, if you're alone, you instantly become more impulsive and more aggressive. And we know this because we study people behaving in automobiles. As soon as you put that shell around people, which protects them from this distributed social regulation, they instantly get more impulsive and more aggressive.
Deanne, you want to follow up on this?
I personally don't agree. I think that these people knew exactly what they were doing. I don't think it's the medium per se. I think that it's part of the thrill to see how far can I go without being caught.
So Congressman Weiner would have taken the Nikon? He would have sent the pictures to Photoshop?
To tell you very honestly, I think he would have done something which was extreme. I see this as being extreme behavior. We see that in adolescents a lot. They're aware of the danger, you know, when they surf on top of a subway. But it's this ultimate face-à-face with death And it is a sort of professional suicide, you know.
But
So-
but surely they
Yeah.
believe that because they are so special.
Yes.
I'm a congressman from New York. I may
Yes.
be mayor someday. People
Yes.
are talking about me in very
Yes.
lofty ways.
Yes.
Therefore, I can get away with anything.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
think there is this hubris and this capacity of saying, I'm beyond, you know. And there is another point which I find very interesting, is that the public and society are less and less tolerant about that. Because of the media, you know, because we are, as we said, like the gap between the ones who have the power and the ones who don't is getting slimmer and slimmer, but at least at the surface. So we think they're our friends, and the idea of saying, how could he? You know, we had the same thing with Tiger Fox. We had the same, like it's a constant repetition of the same problem.
Tiger Woods, you mean?
Yeah,
Tiger
Tiger
Woods,
Woods. Yeah. So what did I say?
I think you said Tiger Fox.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
No. So this is I think one of the issues here.
Okay.
you know.
We're going to call this next segment of our discussion "Diaries Used to Have Locks."
Right.
Okay. We don't do this
How about
anymore.
it?
Allison, here's an odd question: do people understand that when they use social media sites, these sites are public?
I think they understand more now than certainly than they did 5 years ago. But I do think that I mean, I think both Diane and Jordan are right in the sense, in different ways, in the sense that there are structural elements in society that create that power that those people get intoxicated by and then feel godlike. But there are also, I think you're totally right, the fact that people are alone with this technology, but being social. So there's sociality, but it's ephemeral and fleeting and not materially present, which I totally agree with you is completely necessary. So even though they know rationally, emotionally, they're just saying whatever they're going to say because there's no obvious repercussions right away. You're not going to see the crestfallen look on someone's face when you dissed them or said something bad. So even when people know this is public, they still feel as though they're having intimacy. It's something that researchers on television have talked about for years, this idea of a co-present intimacy or parasociality, that people bond to television characters as though they know them, you know, and when they see them on the street, they confuse them. So I think that there's something about the aloneness, but the socialness of it at the same time that
Interesting
produces
mix.
this mix.
Jordan?
Yeah.
Well, this bit about being present, I mean, we also haven't adapted to the fact that things aren't fleeting anymore. You know, and one of the actual advantages to being a limited human being is that most of the things you do disappear. And so all the stupid things you did when you were 14, I assume you did some of them, they're gone. But now,
Everything's online forever.
everything's, yes,
Yeah.
and that's revolutionary, right? Really, it's truly revolutionary. And it's not easy to adapt to that because part of the utility in having everything disappear is that you can take risks and you can take mistakes and you don't pay for it forever. And now we're in a situation where if you make a mistake, the wrong kind, you know, 20 million people can see you within a week and it will never go away. And that's very, very difficult for people to adapt to.
Andrew.
Yeah, just sort of amplify that, I think. It's not my original idea, but I read somewhere and I thought it was really cute, which is that what Facebook and just all of these things eliminate is the capacity for reinvention. You used to be able to, leaving high school for a lot of people actually was a momentous sort of position where you actually left high school behind and went to a different city, a different school, and got to try out a new identity, try out a new persona, try out a new sort of way of being in the world. And as Facebook famously is, it's all your high school friends who kind of follow you around your entire life, right? You're not that kind of, And so that capacity to sort of leave a city and become a different person, it's not gone, right? But it's substantially attenuated, I think. And
It's hard to say how much it might be gone.
Yeah,
because especially
so early days.
if you've been tormented, for example, by bullies, or you're surrounded by people who don't like you and would like to keep you down.
Yeah.
The probability that you can escape from that is genuinely attenuated.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And I think that's a tremendous
And it's a
problem.
loss. It's a
Yeah,
loss.
It is a loss.
Yeah.
But in traditional societies, like even if we say, let's say 50, 60 or 80 years ago in Quebec, people knew each other. Like everybody, if you said something wrong in a meeting or anything, or if there was any type of issue with your neighbors, everybody would know it. So it's a little bit what McLuhan said about the global village. this proximity that existed physically before, it's reproducing itself in the virtual reality.
Everything old is new again.
Exactly, and in many ways, what I'm always impressed when these people who have the power, because if it was just anybody who did what this gentleman did, I don't think it would have been such a big issue. Is that the honors and the awards and the freedom that these people have and that society gives them, allows them to have. I believe it's something that I don't think they forget when they are alone. They're aware of that. And in my perspective, I agree with you. There is this new sociability and there are all these new elements, but there is also this absolute power of the politician or the star or the celebrity that ultimately, and all his life or her life, these people were one-dimensional. This was their aim, to become, and they're taken care of, and they are, there are all sorts of people around them. So I believe the border between their adult persona and their young persona is very, very tiny.
But I wonder, Andrew, I wonder if part of the hurt here, never mind his family, obviously they're crestfallen. Weiner's wife, who we've now discovered is pregnant as well, expecting his child. You talked about this in your book. Authenticity is where it's at today with politicians. If you are authentic, that's what we want.
Right.
That's what we're looking for. This guy clearly was portraying one image publicly, and it really wasn't all that authentic at all, was it?
Yeah, well, although, as I try and point out in the book and elsewhere, that authenticity is a double-edged sword in the sense that we say we want it. We want transparency, we want disclosure, until we see it, and then we think, oh, that's not what we meant. We wanted authentic, right? Which is why they say authenticity it's like advertising, right? It's like sincerity. If you can fake it, then you've got it made, right? But I think the fact that he was sort of double dealing in his marriage and his relationships and so on, I think everyone does that to a certain extent, right? So I think there's nothing super surprising that this was going on.
But you also talked about the Oprahfication of our culture right now. There's some of that at play.
There definitely is a culture of promiscuous self-disclosure, to sort of use it in a more literal term than I sort of intended, right? Which is that there is this idea that's been in the culture for a very long time that one of the evils of civilization is that we wear masks, that it forces us to sort of put on masks and engage in sort of status jockeying with one another, and that a truly authentic society wouldn't require this. But I think, so to a certain extent, we might be seeing this transition, right, to a world where there are no secrets anymore, there are no masks, right? And I don't think we really like it all that much.
I want to take advantage of the fact that I have 4 people in front of me here who spend a lot of time with young people, right? UWO, UVO, U of T.
Hang around journalists.
You hang around journalists.
Internal youth.
Is, Jordan, you first. Are your students more narcissistic today than, say, they would have been a generation ago?
No, I don't believe that. In fact, if they are, it's kept in check by terror, because they're nowhere near as optimistic economically. And no, I do not believe that they're more narcissistic. First of all, who are you comparing them to? The baby boomers?
Well,
They were the new generation, they were as narcissistic as it comes.
Well, Alison, let me put this to you. Since we're doing books here, Steve Maish and Leanne George, we all know them around this table. They were on this program talking about the ego boom.
Right.
They discussed narcissistic personality inventory. It's given every year to U.S. college freshmen. Between 1982 and 2006, they say there was a 50% increase in students with elevated narcissism. Now, do you see that in your daily life?
No, I don't. I agree with Jordan, and I think every generation thinks that it's narcissistic, just like every generation thinks it's on the verge of apocalypse. I feel like there's just something sort of kind of cliched about that. And what's interesting to me about, I think it's true that we live in a culture and an economy that suggests to, and partially because the economy is so precarious, that suggests to individuals that the only through line, the only coherent thing they have is them.
Right.
So they have to work on crafting
Branding.
themselves and self-branding, which I've written about. And I do think that's a reality now in a way that it wasn't, say, 20 years ago. Certainly when I was graduating school, now students get seminars offered to them in how to self-brand, to go out into the workplace. So I do think that discourse exists, and And with reality TV and this culture of public intimacy where people understand that they can play a sort of version of themselves and get
No, I
paid
get
for
that,
it.
But reckless risk-taking is part of branding?
Well, I'm not sure. I think I agree with Diane that it's not everybody who's recklessly risk-taking. And I think people are recklessly risk-taking, but we never hear about it. Kids do that kind of stuff all the time, and we don't hear about it. What I want to say as a sort of rejoinder to the thing about narcissism is really just that, and I was reading again David Reisman's book, The Lonely Crowd, which is a great classic 1950 book, written in 1950s, American sociologist, about, and so prescient, but just basically about how it's not that people are narcissistic. In fact, people are other-directed more than ever. We need others. We have this radar that's going on all the time, figuring out what are other people doing, how can I fit myself in. I need to be in constant communication. I need to be twittering my every thought and feeling. So I don't know how, it goes along with narcissism, but it's not exactly narcissism. It's actually paying attention to other people.
Well, that goes along with this culture of dissolution of boundaries. It's like the people who don't self-disclose are the ones who are confident. If you're constantly self-disclosing, that's one of the things I use in my therapeutic judgment all the time. People who self-disclose without limit, there's something wrong. They don't have a self. And
You need a filter.
well, what happens is that if you're not confident, what you have to do is take everything that you're doubtful about, yourself and your thoughts and your emotions, and you have to broadcast them so that you see how other people respond. Because when they respond, that tells you what that means.
Exactly, yeah.
And so if you already know what that means and you're confident with it, you're going to hold your cards close to your chest. And that's not a lack of transparency. That's the capacity to have a private life. And I do think is that less than it was before? Well, who knows? But certainly lots of people don't have that capacity.
Andrew.
Yeah, I would just say, I think what setting aside narcissism, what gets sort of lost in all this is the essentially addictive nature of what is going on when you get, you tweet something and someone responds, or when you email something and someone responds. And people have talked a lot about the addictive character of email.
Why is that addictive?
Because well, I think, and you'll end up talking about this with the gamification session with Jane McGonigal, which is that video games, gambling, email, they all have a very common underlying structure, which is that they sort of give you this drip, drip, drip of constant reward, right? Games, when you level up, right? When you're playing a video game, it's like one more level, one more level. And email, it's like, I'll just send one more email, I'll send one more tweet.
And something might be there waiting for me.
Might be there waiting, right?
And often it's true. It's partial
often it's
reinforcement.
true, right? And the reinforcement is there, and they've done studies on this, right? And so it's not that dissimilar to the rats, hitting the little lever, getting a little piece of crack. It's very addictive, and that I think needs to be acknowledged, because it's one thing to say our culture is narcissistic. Well, Christopher Lasch wrote The Culture of Narcissism 30 years ago. Nietzsche said that liberalism was narcissistic 100 years ago. So this is not new to call it narcissistic. What is new? The technology and the addictive character of it.
Go ahead, Diane.
I think actually we forget that before speaking of narcissism, we spoke about individualism, right? I believe my students are individualistic. There is a huge difference
But
between
that's a positive
narcissists.
thing.
Absolutely.
Yes.
On the other hand, our society doesn't know how to deal with individuals yet, because we're still under this massification of society. And now you have, and sometimes this clumsiness about individuals living in a massified society produces narcissism. And narcissism is pathological. That's clearly a pathological reaction. There's a very interesting French philosopher, his name is Gilles Lipovetsky. He's actually sociology and philosophy together. He says that there are two types of individualism. There is the selfish individualism, and there is an individualism which is more open to society. And we haven't yet succeeded to get to that stage. And very often we have this extreme individualist attitudes. It's like the other one is not there. So it's an irresponsible individualism. But I don't think it is narcissism yet.
Okay, Jordan?
One of the things we should keep in mind, too, about how badly these politicians and powerful people are punished is that, we know that there's a growing gap between rich and poor in terms of income and power distribution. And one of the consequences of that is that there's a lot more pent-up desire for revenge at the lower end. And so the people who are at the top of the hierarchy, they're sort of shining like stars, but the gap makes it painful. And so if one of those stars gets tarnished, there is endless pent-up desire to tear the tarnished,
movie?
star to shreds.
The bigger they are?
The bigger, yeah. Well, and
harder
this
they
is getting
fall.
worse and worse, right? Because we know how much separation there is between the very few people at the top and the mass of people who are accumulating at the bottom.
I want to get Allison to comment on something. I remember we had the privacy commissioner, Ann Kavukian, in here once. And she goes to schools and she talks about privacy to high school kids. And she looks out in the audience and she says, okay, how many of you young women here in this room have ever sent a naked picture of yourselves to your boyfriends and assumed that it was going to be held in private? And you know, there's titters in the room and so on. And then she says, and how many of you realize that when you do that, they can take that picture and email it to all their buddies and say, look what I'm getting. And she says it's fascinating to look in the room and see the look of horror that comes across half the faces of the girls in that class. You know, do people understand the kinds of risks they're taking in this brave new online world?
Well, as I said before, I think that people are growing to understand it, because now it's almost a cliche. Like, you can't believe that anyone would be that idiotic.
So is this the new normal? The new normal is to just let it all hang out?
Well, I don't know if that's the case, but I think it's media literacy. I mean, it's just about people learning what the media is capable of, or what the technology is capable of, and learning that everything they do online, on Twitter, on Facebook, is public. You know, they're putting it on their Facebook page. They might as well be at Young and Bloor, like, shouting it from the rooftops. But I also think in terms of this generation, just to go along with that issue of privacy, I think it's really, we are in a crisis of understanding around what is private anymore, and the boundaries between private and public, and we talked about this culture of public intimacy, have really broken down, and it's something that Mark Andreevich calls, in the younger generation, surveillance chic, right? Like, it's chic to be watched. It's chic to get on your webcam and vlog. It's chic to, and we live in, these are all just catchwords that are floating around the culture now. We're in an attention economy. We're in a reputation economy. These are just common terms that are now used to accompany this.
They just told me in my ear, we got some, I don't know if you heard, but there was a bit of a riot in Vancouver last night.
Yes,
I gathered the Canucks lost, and some people were upset about it. Do you want to roll this footage and we'll just talk about this? I mean, nowadays, okay, put the picture up. Let's take a look.
Oh yeah, that's great.
You know, I guess you think nowadays, look at this: maced in the face, hit with a baton, tear gassed twice, 6 broken fingers, blood everywhere. Okay, you can read the rest there. You know, you can't do anything in private anymore, and my hunch is that all those people who behaved badly last night thought they were getting away with a lot of stuff, but you know,
Well,
it's
he
all
just
out there,
said,
folks.
I'm on the news.
Yeah.
It's history. Well, and that's a great clip, because one of the things that's really worth understanding about people is that any attention is better than none. You know, and even these people who do terrible things, you know, like the school shootings and so forth, and even if they shoot themselves afterwards, they got attention. And attention is a currency, like it's a primary currency. And so part of the reason that people are willing to broadcast themselves for infamy or for fame is because, well, all of a sudden they're in everyone's eyes, and that is a form of status. And you know, we don't know. That's sort of associated with the points you were making about you know, narcissistic attention seeking.
It's the celebrity thing also.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
the currency
like
today, isn't it?
Yeah.
You
well,
know-
and there, Lindsay Lohan and actresses like of her type also capitalize on that. They'll use infamy, no problem. It's a publicity.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
I think it's beyond that. Guy Debord and Jean Baudrillard, you know, address those things. It's the spectacle. Every moment of our existence has to be turned into a spectacle. Look at the prom nights, you know, everything. It's just the celebrity culture, you know, that makes us all vulnerable, you know, to the attention. It's the attention, but it's something that it's quite tragic, actually, because nothing, speaking of authenticity, when you mentioned, I think your book is very relevant, you know, the idea of trying underneath all this mise en scène to
Mise en
find...
scène.
Yes.
Can I tell you something? We've done this program 5 years. No one's ever said that expression before.
Voilà.
Way to
So
go,
here we
Tia.
go.
I feel
Okay.
honored
It's a
to
big
be on the
day.
panel where
Let's go here, Allison and then JP.
Well, I mean, just to add to what Diane was saying about Guy Debord and Baudrillard, I mean, Debord, the spectacle isn't just the spectacle. The spectacle is capitalism. So I just want to add that in the terms of the monetization of attention. So these things are potent human values, you might say, core human impulses. But in our culture, in this particular economic moment, it makes monetary sense to get fame no matter how you can, because you can translate it into cash.
And also
The,
culturally.
the infrastructure exists for that now with
And
the technology.
existentially, it's very deep. I think obviously what you're saying is very right, but for the human being, for this
Yeah,
individual,
I agree.
which are completely absorbed, from the masses. I mean, whatever that means. I don't want to enter into the details of defining what the mass is. There is this need as an individual to be part of the spectacle, of the general spectacle.
Well, there's a large body of research that shows that you're much more likely to be eminent as a man if you grew up in a small town. Now, well, why? Well, it's easy to be a football hero if your town has 400 people in it. And if you're a football hero where there's 400 people, you're at the top of the hierarchy. But as people move into mass cities and as everyone's competing on the same stage for limited amounts of attention, what you have to do to attract attention has to be ratcheted up. And so, partly I think what we're seeing also is the creation of these mass dominance hierarchies with millions and millions of people in them, and a desperate attempt by people to rise up to a position of visibility where they could have done it in groups of 300 before.
Andrew, in the last 20 seconds here, do you think this is the new normal, this kind of risk-taking that we hadn't seen in the past?
I hope not, because I think that the one group in our society we know has no privacy are children. And I think to the extent to which we have no distinction between public and private is the extent to which we become infantilized as a culture.
Yikes.
Yeah, right on.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, for this discussion. I want to thank Jordan Peterson, our Your Agenda essayist, and actually, Jordan, Zian, I want to thank you as well, Pacom. Don't you go anywhere, because actually you're doing an essay in just a few moments' time, and everybody else, you have to sit here and watch it, okay? Allison Hearn and Andrew Potter on the other side of the table. Thanks so much for this discussion, everybody.
Thanks.